Chapter 1. Home for the holidays. Jill Parker pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the train window, watching snowflakes swirl like tiny dancers in the gray December sky. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks was oddly soothing, a soundtrack to the chaos in her head. She was 32, successful, respected, and exhausted. The kind of exhausted that no amount of peppermint lattes or spa weekends could fix. Her phone buzzed in her lap. A text from her father. "Drive safe from the station. Your mother's making that cranberry thing you like." Jill smiled despite herself. Her parents were the one constant in a life that felt increasingly transactional. Deals, deadlines, and dates that ended with her muttering excuses and bolting before dessert. She had mastered the art of the polite escape. The train slowed, brakes squealing. Jill gathered her bag and stepped onto the platform, the cold biting through her wool coat. The town looked exactly as she remembered. Snow-dusted rooftops, wreaths on every door, and the faint scent of pine drifting from the Christmas tree lot across the street. It was charming. It was home, and it made her feel like a fraud. She slid into her car and drove through streets lined with twinkling lights, past the bakery where she and Bruce used to split cinnamon rolls on lazy Saturday mornings. Her stomach tightened. 6 years, and the memory still had teeth. Bruce Dixon, the man who saw her when no one else did. The man she threw away because her ego had gotten drunk on attention. She gripped the steering wheel harder, her father's words echoing in her mind. "You let your ego destroy a man who did nothing but lift you up." She hated that he was right. The Parker house was a postcard, white siding, green shutters, and a wreath big enough to be seen from space. Jill barely had the car in park before her mother flung open the door, apron dusted with flour. "Jilly!" Her mother enveloped her in a hug that smelled like sugar cookies and nostalgia. "You look thin. Are you eating?" "Hi, Mom." "Yes, I'm eating." Jill laughed, letting herself be fussed over. It was easier than explaining the truth, that she ate plenty, just not with anyone who mattered. Her father appeared in the doorway, tall and solid, his presence as grounding as ever. "Welcome home, kiddo." He kissed her forehead and took her bag like it weighed nothing. "How's the Empire?" "Still standing," Jill said. "Barely." Dinner was warm and loud, the way Parker dinners always were. Her mother chattered about the Christmas pageant. Her father grumbled about supply chain delays, and Jill smiled in all the right places. But inside, she was somewhere else, back in a tiny apartment kitchen, laughing as Bruce burned pancakes because he insisted on flipping them like a short-order cook. She pushed the memory away and focused on her mashed potatoes. Later, in her childhood bedroom, Jill stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily. She had everything she thought she wanted: career, independence, respect. So why did it feel hollow? Why did every first date feel like a job interview with cocktails? She knew the answer. She'd known it for years. She wanted what she threw away, and she was terrified she'd never find it again. Her phone buzzed again. A group text from old high school friends. "Christmas Eve drinks at Murphy's? Who's in?" Jill typed a non-committal maybe and tossed the phone aside. She wasn't in the mood for small talk or nostalgia. What she wanted was peace. And maybe, if the universe was feeling generous, a sign that she wasn't doomed to spend every holiday dodging questions about why she was still single. She laughed softly at herself. A sign, right? Like the universe was taking requests. The next morning, Jill bundled up and headed to the grocery store. Her mother had a list as long as a CVS receipt, and Jill volunteered because she needed air. The store was bustling, carts squeaking, Christmas music blaring overhead. Jill navigated the aisles like a pro, tossing cranberries, cream, and a suspiciously large ham into her cart. She turned into the produce section and froze. There he was, Bruce Dixon, standing by the carrots, comparing two bundles like the fate of the world depended on beta-carotene. He looked older, broader in the shoulders, but still Bruce, still steady, still the man who once held her heart like it was something precious. Jill's pulse spiked. Her first instinct was to run, pretend she didn't see him, abandon the cart, and sprint for the parking lot. But another voice, quieter, wiser, whispered, "You owe him an apology." She swallowed hard and started toward him, rehearsing words in her head. "Hi, Bruce. Long time. I'm sorry for being a self-absorbed idiot." That sounded terrible. Maybe just hi for now. She didn't see the basket on the floor until her foot caught it. Time slowed. Jill stumbled, arms flailing, grabbed the corner of a display table, and sent a pyramid of condensed milk cans crashing to the floor. The sound was deafening. Cans rolled in every direction like tiny silver bowling balls. Jill stood frozen, mortified, cheeks blazing. And then she looked up. Bruce was staring at her, blue eyes wide, a carrot still in his hand. For a heartbeat, time stopped completely. Chapter 2. The grocery store collision. Jill's brain short-circuited. Words, any words, would have been helpful, but her vocabulary had apparently packed up and left for the holidays. She stood there, surrounded by rogue cans of condensed milk, looking like the world's least graceful ballerina. Bruce bent down, scooped up a can, and placed it back on the display with calm precision. "Still making an entrance, I see," he said, voice warm but edged with something Jill couldn't quite name. Amusement? Surprise? A hint of old hurt? Jill forced a laugh that sounded like a squeaky door hinge. Well, you know me. Always committed to chaos. Bruce crouched to gather more cans, and Jill scrambled to help, nearly colliding with him in the process. Their hands brushed over a can, and Jill felt a jolt, like static electricity, only deeper, sharper. She snatched her hand back as if the can were radioactive. Sorry, she muttered, stacking cans with the focus of someone defusing a bomb. Bruce straightened, holding the last can. No harm done. He glanced at her cart, then back at her. Home for Christmas? Jill nodded, gripping the edge of the display like it might keep her from floating away. Yeah, taking a break from work. My parents insisted. Good, Bruce said simply, as if that was all there was to say. He turned back to the carrots, examining them with the same quiet deliberation that used to drive Jill crazy, in a good way. He never rushed decisions, whether it was produce or life plans. He was steady, solid, everything she wasn't when she walked away. Jill cleared her throat. You look well. Bruce's mouth curved into a polite smile. Thanks, you too. The silence stretched, thick and awkward. Jill hated it. They used to talk for hours about everything and nothing. Now she couldn't even string together a sentence without sounding like a malfunctioning robot. She blurted, I owe you an apology. Bruce's hand stilled on the carrots. Slowly, he looked at her, blue eyes steady, unreadable. For what? Jill swallowed hard. For how things ended. For being selfish. She stopped, because the words felt too small for the weight of what she'd done. Bruce studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay. Just, okay? Jill blinked. That's it. What do you want me to say? His tone wasn't harsh, but it wasn't soft either. It was 6 years ago. I know, Jill said quickly. She broke off. Because what was she trying to do? Rewrite history in the middle of the produce aisle? Bruce picked up his carrots and placed them in his basket. I appreciate the apology, he said finally. Really? Jill nodded, throat tight. She wanted to say more, to explain that she'd learned, that she wasn't the same person who threw him away for a handful of compliments. But Bruce was already glancing toward the checkout line. Well, he said, adjusting his grip on the basket. Take care, Jill. And just like that, he walked away. Jill stood frozen, watching him disappear down the aisle, her heart pounding like she'd just run a marathon. She wanted to chase after him, to say something, anything, that would keep him from vanishing again. But her feet wouldn't move. Instead, she stared at the carrots he left behind, wondering if the universe had just handed her a second chance, and if she was brave enough to take it. Chapter 3. The apology attempt. Jill sat in her car in the grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel like it was a lifeline. Her breath fogged the windshield, and her heart still hadn't slowed from the encounter. 6 years of rehearsed apologies, and when the moment came, she'd managed. What? A vague sorry and a deer-in-headlights stare. She groaned, thunking her forehead against the wheel. Smooth, Parker. Real smooth. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Did you get the condensed milk? Jill stared at the message, surrounded by the ghosts of rolling cans, and laughed out loud. Oh, I got plenty of condensed milk, Mom. She drove home on autopilot, replaying Bruce's voice in her head. Calm, polite, distant. That last part stung more than she expected. He hadn't been cruel, hadn't thrown her mistakes in her face. He just accepted the apology and walked away, like she was a stranger. And maybe she was. The Jill who broke his heart wasn't the Jill sitting here now. At least she hoped not. Back at the house, Jill unloaded groceries while her mother hummed carols in the kitchen. The scent of cinnamon and butter filled the air, wrapping Jill in a blanket of nostalgia she didn't deserve. You were gone a while, her mother said, peering over her glasses. Run into someone? Jill froze, a bag of cranberries in her hand. Yeah, Bruce. Her mother's eyebrows shot up like fireworks. Bruce Dixon? Well, isn't that something? She went back to stirring cookie dough, far too casual for the bomb she'd just dropped. How is he? Fine, Jill said, voice tight. He looks good. Her mother smiled faintly. He always was a nice boy. Jill didn't answer. She couldn't, because nice didn't begin to cover it. Bruce had been steady when her world was shaky, kind when she was cruel, patient when she was impossible. And she tossed him aside like last season's shoes. She escaped to her room under the pretense of wrapping gifts, but instead she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her phone. Should she text him? Call him? Pretend the grocery store fiasco never happened? Her fingers hovered over the screen, then retreated. No, if she was going to do this, it had to be in person. No hiding behind emojis and carefully crafted messages. She owed him more than that. The next day, Jill found herself driving past the park where Bruce used to play pickup hockey with his friends. The rink was still there, lights glowing against the snow, laughter ringing out as skaters zipped across the ice. For a moment, she imagined pulling over, walking up to him, saying everything she'd rehearsed in her head. But the lot was empty. No Bruce, just strangers gliding under the Christmas lights. Jill sighed and kept driving, her chest tight with something that felt suspiciously like regret mixed with hope. She wasn't sure which was worse. That evening, her parents hosted their annual pre-Christmas dinner. A cozy affair with neighbors, old friends, and enough food to feed a small army. Jill smiled through conversations about supply chains and holiday recipes, but her mind was elsewhere. Halfway through dessert, her mother leaned over and whispered, "By the way, Bruce is coming to the neighborhood party tomorrow." Jill nearly choked on her pie. "What?" Her mother shrugged, all innocence. "His parents are friends with the Millers. He's back in town for the holidays." Jill stared at her plate, pulse hammering. Tomorrow. She'd see him tomorrow. And this time, she had to do better than a clumsy apology in the produce aisle. She had one night to figure out how. Chapter 4. The party sparks. The Parker living room looked like Christmas had exploded, in the best possible way. Twinkling lights framed the windows, garlands draped across the mantel, and the scent of cinnamon and pine mingled with laughter. Jill stood near the punch bowl, clutching a glass like it was a shield. Her parents' annual neighborhood party was in full swing, and Jill was doing her best impression of someone who wasn't silently spiraling. Bruce was here, somewhere. She scanned the crowd, heart thudding like a drumline. Neighbors chatted in clusters, kids darted between legs with plates of cookies, and the stereo crooned Bing Crosby's White Christmas. Jill spotted Mrs. Miller near the tree, animatedly discussing cookie recipes. If Bruce was invited through the Millers, he'd show up eventually. Jill smoothed her sweater, checked her reflection in the window. Why did her hair suddenly look rebellious? And reminded herself to breathe. She'd spent half the night rehearsing what to say. Something honest, something that didn't sound like a bad rom-com script. "Hi, Bruce. I was a fool. You deserved better. I'm sorry." Simple. Direct. No babbling. The doorbell rang. Jill's stomach dropped. Conversations paused as her father strode to the door, booming his usual, "Come on in." Jill turned just in time to see Bruce step inside, snowflakes clinging to his coat collar like tiny diamonds. He looked unfairly good. Dark jeans, a gray sweater that hinted at broad shoulders, and that calm, steady presence that had once been her safe harbor. He smiled at her father, shook his hand, exchanged greetings with a few neighbors. Jill's pulse raced. She could leave, pretend she had an urgent call, slip out the back, but her mother's voice floated from the kitchen. "Jilly, come say hello." "Traitor." Jill pasted on a smile and wove through the crowd, her glass trembling just enough to make her pray she didn't spill punch on anyone. Bruce turned as she approached, and for a moment, the noise faded. Just him, just her, and 6 years of unsaid words hanging between them like mistletoe no one wanted to acknowledge. "Hi," Jill said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Hi," Bruce replied, polite, reserved. His eyes held hers for a beat before flicking to the glass in her hand. "Punch still as lethal as ever?" Jill laughed, grateful for the lifeline. "Probably. I'm living dangerously." Bruce smiled faintly, and something in Jill's chest loosened. They stood there, awkward but not hostile, like two people circling the edges of a memory. "How've you been?" Jill asked, forcing casual into her tone. "Good," Bruce said. "Work steady. Life's quiet." Quiet. The word landed like a pebble in Jill's stomach. She wanted to ask more. What kind of work, what kind of life? But before she could, Mrs. Miller swooped in with a tray of gingerbread men and a story about her cat's latest escapade. Bruce listened politely. Jill nodded at the right moments, and the conversation dissolved into holiday chatter. By the time Jill escaped to the kitchen for a refill, her nerves were frayed. She leaned against the counter, inhaling the scent of sugar cookies, and muttered, "Get it together, Parker." Her mother appeared beside her, eyes twinkling. "He looks good, doesn't he?" Jill groaned. "Mom, what?" "I'm just saying." Her mother patted her arm. "Second chances don't come gift-wrapped every day." Jill stared at the punch bowl, her reflection rippling in cranberry red. Second chances. Was that what this was? Or was she setting herself up for heartbreak all over again? Before she could decide, Bruce walked into the kitchen, empty glass in hand. Their eyes met, and Jill felt the world tilt just slightly. "Mind if I steal some punch?" he asked. "Go ahead," Jill said, stepping aside. Her heart thudded as he poured, the silence stretching like taffy. She could say something now, something real, or let the moment slip. She opened her mouth. "Bruce." He looked up, waiting. Jill swallowed hard. "Would you maybe want to catch up sometime? Coffee? No canned milk pyramids involved." Bruce's brows lifted, surprise flickering across his face. Then he smiled, small, cautious, but real. "Sure. Coffee sounds good." Jill exhaled, relief flooding her like warm cider. "Great. I'll text you." "Yeah," Bruce said, setting his glass down. "Do that." And just like that, the party noise roared back, but Jill barely heard it. Because for the first time in years, hope didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt like possibility. Chapter 5. Coffee and Confessions. Jill arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, because apparently her anxiety had decided punctuality was a personality trait. The place was cozy, all warm wood and twinkling lights, with a Christmas tree in the corner dripping in ornaments shaped like tiny coffee cups. Bing Crosby crooned softly from the speakers, and the scent of roasted beans wrapped around her like a hug. She chose a table by the window, where snowflakes drifted lazily against the glass, and tried not to look like someone rehearsing a TED Talk. Her phone sat on the table, screen dark, but her thoughts were loud enough to drown out the carols. Keep it light. Don't overshare. Don't cry into your latte. The door opened, and Bruce stepped in, shaking snow from his coat. Jill's pulse jumped like a startled rabbit. He spotted her immediately, of course he did, and walked over with that same steady stride that used to make her feel safe. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. His smile was polite, but warmer than last night. "Hope I'm not late." "You're right on time," Jill said, grateful her voice didn't squeak. "I'm just early." Bruce chuckled, and the sound tugged at something deep in her chest. "Still a planner, huh?" "Occupational hazard," Jill said, smiling. "Coffee?" "Black," Bruce said, and Jill flagged down the barista, ordering his and her usual, though she hesitated before adding whipped cream to hers. Old habits die hard. When the drinks arrived, Jill wrapped her hands around her mug like it could anchor her. "So," she began, aiming for casual. "How've you been? Really?" Bruce stirred his coffee slowly, eyes thoughtful. "Good. Work steady. I do some consulting now, small businesses, logistic stuff." "That sounds perfect for you," Jill said honestly. "You were always good at solving puzzles." Bruce smiled faintly. "And you? Still running the empire?" Jill laughed. "Trying to. Dad's training me to take over eventually. It's a lot." "I bet," Bruce said, and for a moment, his gaze softened, like he could see the weight she carried. It made Jill want to spill everything. The stress, the loneliness, the endless parade of bad dates. But she bit it back. This wasn't therapy. It was coffee. With Bruce. Still, silence stretched, and Jill hated it. She took a breath. Bruce about the other day, and about 6 years ago. His eyes met hers, steady, unreadable. "You don't have to." "I do," Jill said quickly. "I was selfish. I thought attention meant something it didn't. I hurt you, and I hate that I did. You deserved better." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that." Jill's throat tightened. "I've thought about it a lot. About you. About us." Bruce's expression flickered. Surprise? Maybe, or something deeper. But he didn't speak. Jill pressed on, because if she stopped now, she'd never start again. "You were good for me," she said softly. "Better than I realized at the time." Bruce's gaze held hers, and for a heartbeat, the cafe faded. The music, the chatter, the snow outside. It was just them, suspended in a moment that felt fragile and infinite all at once. Then Bruce looked down, wrapping his hands around his mug. "I cared about you, Jill. A lot. But when you left, I had to move on." "I know," Jill whispered. "I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." Bruce nodded, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was heavy, yes, but honest, like the first crack in a wall that had stood too long. Finally, Bruce smiled, a real smile, small but warm. "So, tell me about these historically bad first dates." Jill laughed, startled and grateful. "Oh, you have no idea." And just like that, the tension eased, replaced by something lighter. They talked about work, about family, about the time Jill accidentally set off a fire alarm during a client presentation. Bruce laughed until his eyes crinkled, and Jill felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope that didn't hurt. When they finally stood to leave, Bruce held the door for her, snow swirling around them like confetti. "This was nice," he said. "It was," Jill agreed, her heart thudding. "Maybe we could do it again?" Bruce hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I'd like that." Jill smiled, stepping into the cold, her breath puffing like smoke. For the first time in a long. Chapter 6. Snowed in. The snow started as a whisper, soft flakes drifting lazily past Jill's windshield as she drove home from the cafe. By the time she reached her parents' street, it was a full-blown symphony, swirling in thick white sheets that blurred the world into a watercolor painting. She parked in the driveway, boots crunching through fresh powder, and barely made it inside before her mother called from the living room. "They're saying it's the worst storm in 10 years. Jill peeled off her coat, shaking snow from her hair. "Seriously?" Her father appeared, remote in hand, nodding toward the TV where a weather anchor gestured at a map drowning in blue. "Roads are closing. Power might go out." "Great," Jill muttered, sinking onto the couch. She had plans, well, hopes, for another coffee with Bruce later this week. Now nature was conspiring against her. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. A text from Bruce. "You home safe? Roads are a mess." Jill smiled despite the storm. "Made it." "You?" "Trying to. My folks' place lost power. Heading back toward town, but visibility's awful." Jill frowned, glancing at the window where snow whipped like a blizzard in a snow globe. "That sounds dangerous. Where are you now?" "About 2 miles from your street. Cars crawling." Jill stared at the message, heart thudding. 2 miles. In this weather? She typed fast. "Come here. Seriously, it's closer than your parents' place and we've got heat. There was a pause. Then, you sure? Positive. Get here before you end up in a ditch. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the white haze, and Jill was at the door before Bruce even knocked. He stepped inside, snow clinging to his coat, hair damp, cheeks flushed from the cold. Wow, Jill said, taking his coat. You look like you wrestled a snowstorm and lost. Bruce chuckled, stamping snow from his boots. Feels about right. Her mother appeared, all warmth and hospitality. Bruce, what a surprise. Come in, come in. We've got chili on the stove. Bruce smiled, and Jill felt a pang of something sharp and sweet. He belonged here, always had. And now, thanks to a freak storm, he was standing in her parents' kitchen like no time had passed. Dinner was cozy, laughter mingling with the scent of spices. Jill watched Bruce chat with her father about supply chains like they were old colleagues, and something inside her softened. He fit. He always fit. Afterward, when the power flickered and the wind howled like a freight train, her mother declared, "Guest room's ready if you need it, Bruce." No sense braving that mess. Bruce hesitated, then nodded. Thanks, appreciate it. Jill tried to act casual, but her pulse was a drumline. Bruce, sleeping under the same roof. The universe had a twisted sense of humor. Later, Jill found him in the living room, staring out at the snow. The glow from the Christmas tree painted his face in soft gold, and for a moment, Jill just watched, memorizing the curve of his jaw, the quiet strength in his posture. Looks like we're stuck, she said, stepping beside him. Bruce glanced at her, a smile tugging at his lips. Could be worse. Jill laughed softly. Yeah, could be canned milk pyramids. He chuckled, and the sound warmed her more than the fire crackling in the hearth. Silence settled, comfortable this time, and Jill felt the weight of all the things she wanted to say pressing against her ribs. Bruce, she began, voice low. Do you ever think about us? His gaze held hers, steady, searching. For a heartbeat, the world outside vanished. The storm, the years, the mistakes. It was just them, standing in the glow of Christmas lights, with something fragile and electric humming in the air. Yes, Bruce said quietly. Sometimes. Jill's breath caught. Me too. And then the power went out, plunging the room into darkness, except for the tree lights, still twinkling like stars. Jill laughed, startled, and Bruce grinned, shaking his head. Guess the universe likes drama, he said. Jill smiled back, heart racing. Guess so. Chapter 7. Old wounds, new truths. The blackout turned the Parker house into a world of shadows and soft glows. The Christmas tree lights, battery-powered, thank heaven, cast a warm shimmer across the living room, painting Bruce in gold and green as he settled onto the couch. Jill perched on the armchair opposite, clutching a throw blanket like it could shield her from the storm inside her chest. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Inside, silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of a log. Jill's parents had retreated upstairs with candles, leaving her and Bruce alone in a cocoon of flickering light and unspoken words. Jill cleared her throat, the sound loud in the quiet. So, this is cozy. Bruce smiled faintly. Better than being stuck in a car. True, Jill said, tugging the blanket tighter. Her heart thudded like a drumline. She could keep this light, whether talk, holiday plans, or she could do the thing she'd been avoiding for 6 years. Tell the truth. She chose the truth. Bruce, she began, voice low, steadying herself against the weight of his gaze. I need to say something, and I need you to hear me out. Bruce leaned back, expression calm but alert. Okay. Jill took a breath, words tumbling out before fear could stop them. I was awful to you, back then. I thought I was, leveling up, like attention meant I was worth more. And I threw away the best thing I ever had because I was too blind to see it. Bruce didn't move, didn't speak. His silence was a mirror, reflecting every mistake she'd made. I've regretted it, Jill said softly. Every day. Not because I'm lonely, though God, I am, but because you deserved better than what I gave you. Bruce's jaw tightened, just slightly. You're right, he said finally. I did. The words landed like a punch, sharp and clean. Jill swallowed hard. I know, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know. Bruce stared at the fire, its glow flickering across his face. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but steady. You broke me, Jill. Jill flinched. I loved you, Bruce continued, eyes still on the flames. Not in some casual, you're fun to hang out with way. I loved you like you were home. And when you walked away, it felt like the ground disappeared. Jill's throat burned. Bruce. He looked at her then, blue eyes clear and unflinching. I spent months wondering what I did wrong, what I could have done better. And then I realized, it wasn't about me. It was about you needing something I couldn't give. Jill blinked back tears, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't need something better. I just needed to grow up. Bruce's expression softened, but his tone stayed firm. Maybe, but that was your journey, not mine. Jill nodded, shame curling in her chest like smoke. I'm sorry, she said again, because it was all she had. Bruce was quiet for a long moment, then sighed, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. You know what's funny? What? Jill asked, voice trembling. I'm not angry anymore, Bruce said. I was, for a long time, but now, I just hope you're happy. Jill laughed softly, bitter and broken. I'm not. Bruce's brows lifted, surprise flickering across his face. Why? Because I had what I wanted, Jill said, tears slipping free, and I threw it away. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. It was the kind of silence that held truth, raw and unvarnished. Bruce didn't reach for her, didn't offer platitudes. He just sat there, steady as ever, while Jill wiped her cheeks and tried to breathe. Finally, Bruce spoke, voice low. You're not the same person you were. Jill met his gaze, hope sparking like a match in the dark. Neither are you. Bruce's lips curved, small, cautious, but real. Guess we'll see what that means. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something fragile and new began to stir. Chapter 8. Christmas Eve Magic. The storm had passed, leaving the town blanketed in snow so pristine it looked like a postcard. Jill stood at her bedroom window the next morning, watching sunlight glitter across drifts piled high along the street. The world felt hushed, like it was holding its breath for something magical. Downstairs, her mother was already humming carols, and her father was wrestling with a stubborn strand of lights. Jill pulled on a red sweater and jeans, heart thudding with anticipation. Tonight was the Christmas Eve tree lighting in the town square, a tradition she'd loved since childhood. And Bruce had texted her that morning, heading to the tree lighting later. You going? Jill stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Wouldn't miss it. By evening, the square was alive with music and laughter. Strings of lights crisscrossed overhead, casting a warm glow on bundled-up families sipping cocoa. The massive evergreen in the center stood like a sentinel, its branches heavy with ornaments and anticipation. Jill wove through the crowd, scanning faces, her breath puffing in the frosty air. She spotted him near the cocoa stand, hands tucked into his coat pockets, snowflakes clinging to his hair like tiny stars. Bruce looked comfortable, like he belonged here, like he belonged everywhere Jill wanted to be. Hey, she said, stepping up beside him, her voice steadier than she felt. Bruce turned, and his smile, small, genuine, sent warmth flooding through her. Hey, you made it. Wouldn't miss it, Jill echoed, and they shared a look that felt like a secret. They grabbed cocoa and wandered toward the tree, the crowd buzzing with excitement as the mayor took the mic. Jill sipped her drink, trying not to stare at Bruce's profile, the way his breath curled in the cold, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at something a kid said nearby. You used to love this, Bruce said suddenly, nodding toward the tree. I still do, Jill said softly. It feels like home. Bruce glanced at her, and for a moment, the noise faded. Yeah, he said. It does. The countdown began. 10, 9, 8, and Jill felt her pulse sync with the rhythm. When the lights blazed to life, the crowd erupted in cheers, and Jill gasped, because it was beautiful. The tree shimmered like a galaxy, colors dancing against the snow, and Bruce was standing so close she could feel the heat of him through her coat. Pretty amazing, he said, his voice low, almost lost in the music. Jill turned to him, words catching in her throat. Yeah, she whispered. It is. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked, and the world narrowed to two people standing under 1,000 lights. Jill felt the pull, the same pull she'd felt years ago, the one that had never really gone away. Her breath hitched, and Bruce's gaze dipped, just slightly, toward her lips. And then a kid barreled past, nearly knocking Jill into the cocoa stand. She laughed, startled, and Bruce steadied her with a hand on her arm, warm and firm. You okay? He asked, his touch lingering just long enough to make Jill's heart trip over itself. Yeah, she said, smiling despite the interruption. Guess the universe isn't ready for drama tonight. Bruce chuckled, releasing her arm, but his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary. Maybe not tonight, he said. They walked together through the square, talking about nothing and everything. Holiday traditions, favorite movies, the absurdity of inflatable lawn decorations. And as snow began to fall again, soft and slow, Jill realized something. Hope didn't feel fragile anymore. It felt like possibility, like a door creaking open after years of being locked. Chapter 9. The almost kiss. The drive back from the tree lighting was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Jill sat in the passenger seat of Bruce's truck, the heater humming softly, snowflakes tapping against the windshield like tiny fingers. Outside, the world was a blur of white and twinkling lights, but inside, it felt like a bubble, warm, fragile, and humming with something Jill couldn't quite name. Bruce pulled into her parents' driveway, tires crunching over fresh snow. The house glowed like a beacon, garlands twinkling, smoke curling from the chimney. Jill unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, reluctant to break the spell. Thanks for the ride, she said, her voice softer than she intended. Bruce smiled, that steady, quiet smile that had always undone her. Anytime. They sat there for a beat too long, the engine ticking as it cooled, their breath fogging the glass. Jill's heart thudded like a drumline, and she felt the pull, the same magnetic tug that had haunted her since the grocery store. She turned slightly, meeting his gaze, and the air shifted. Bruce's eyes dipped, just barely, toward her lips. Jill's breath caught. The world narrowed to this moment, this heartbeat, this impossible possibility. She could feel it, the kiss hovering like a snowflake about to fall. And then headlights swept across the driveway, breaking the spell. Jill jerked back as a car pulled in behind them, tires skidding on ice. Her parents' neighbors spilled out, laughing, arms full of gifts, their voices slicing through the quiet like bells. Bruce cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Guess we've got company. Jill forced a laugh, though her pulse was still racing. Yeah. Timing's everything, right? Bruce smiled faintly, but his eyes held hers for one lingering second before he opened his door. Jill followed, boots crunching on snow, her mind a whirl of what-ifs and almosts. Inside, the house was chaos. Neighbors chatting, carols playing, her mother passing out cookies like a benevolent dictator. Jill plastered on a smile, but her thoughts were still in the truck, in that breathless space where the world had tilted and then snapped back. Later, when the crowd thinned and Bruce said goodnight, his voice was warm but careful. See you soon. Jill nodded, her throat tight. Yeah, soon. She watched him walk out into the snow, his figure fading into the night, and felt the ache of something unfinished. Something that wanted to be more. Chapter 10. Christmas Morning Revelation. Jill woke to the scent of cinnamon rolls and the distant hum of carols drifting up from the kitchen. Sunlight spilled across her childhood bedroom, catching on the garland her mother had draped over the dresser. For a moment, everything felt simple, like she was 10 again, waiting for Santa. But then reality settled in, heavy and complicated. Bruce. Last night, the almost kiss that still hummed in her veins. She dressed slowly, pulling on a soft sweater and jeans, and padded downstairs. Her parents were in full holiday mode, her mother bustling between oven and table, her father nursing coffee like it was a sacred ritual. Merry Christmas, kiddo, her dad said, his voice warm as he handed her a mug. Sleep okay? Yeah, Jill lied, wrapping her hands around the cup. Morning looks beautiful. Her father nodded toward the window, where snow glittered like diamonds. Perfect Christmas. Jill smiled faintly, but her thoughts were tangled. She wanted to ask him something, needed to, but the words stuck. Her father had always been her compass, even when she hated what he had to say. And right now, she needed direction more than ever. She waited until her mother disappeared into the pantry before blurting, Dad, can I ask you something? He raised an eyebrow, setting his mug down. That tone usually means trouble. Jill laughed softly, nerves buzzing. It's about relationships. About me. Her father leaned back, folding his arms, his expression patient. Go on. Jill stared at the steam curling from her coffee. I saw Bruce. We've been talking. And I keep thinking about what you said years ago, about ego and lessons. Her father's gaze softened, but he didn't interrupt. I was stupid, Jill said quietly. I threw away something good because I thought attention meant value. And now, I don't know if I deserve a second chance. Her father was silent for a moment, then spoke in that steady tone that had guided her through every storm. Jill, life isn't about deserving. It's about choosing. You made a bad choice back then. You owned it. That matters. But if you want something now, you fight for it. You don't sit around waiting for the universe to hand it to you. Jill blinked, throat tight. What if he doesn't want me back? Her father shrugged. Then you walk away knowing you tried. Regrets heavy, kiddo. Don't carry more than you have to. Jill laughed softly, tears pricking her eyes. You always make it sound so simple. Her father smiled, reaching for his coffee. Simple doesn't mean easy. Later, as Jill helped her mother set the table, her phone buzzed. A text from Bruce. Merry Christmas. Hope you're having a good one. Jill stared at the screen, her father's words echoing in her head. If you want something, fight for it. She typed back before fear could stop her. Merry Christmas. Any chance you're free later? I'd love to see you. Her thumb hovered for half a second, then hit send. The message flew into the void, and Jill's heart raced like a sleigh on ice. Chapter 11. The Grand Gesture. By mid-afternoon, Jill was pacing her childhood bedroom like a woman possessed. Bruce had replied to her text an hour ago. Free after dinner. What did you have in mind? Her fingers had hovered over the keyboard, but nothing felt big enough. Coffee wasn't enough. Small talk wasn't enough. If she wanted him to believe she'd changed, she needed to show him. Not with words, but with something that mattered. Her gaze landed on the corner of the room, where an old hockey stick leaned against the wall, a relic from the years she'd spent tagging along to Bruce's pickup games, cheering from the sidelines, pretending she understood icing. She smiled, a spark of an idea igniting. An hour later, Jill was trudging through snow toward the frozen pond at the edge of town, breath puffing in the cold, a thermos of cocoa in one hand and that battered hockey stick in the other. The pond was quiet, the ice smooth and glittering under strings of lights someone had hung between trees. It looked like magic, simple, imperfect magic. She set the thermos on a bench, her heart thudding as headlights appeared in the distance. Bruce's truck rolled to a stop, and he climbed out, his breath curling in the frosty air. When he spotted her, his brows lifted in surprise. "Jill," he called, walking closer. "What is all this?" Jill grinned, nerves buzzing like Christmas lights. "You once told me the best conversations happen on the ice. So, here we are." Bruce stared at the stick in her hand, then laughed, a warm, startled sound that made Jill's chest ache. "You remember that?" "I remember everything," Jill said softly, "including how you never let me quit, even when I fell every 5 seconds. Bruce's smile faded into something gentler, something that made Jill's pulse trip. "You didn't quit," he said. "You never quit." Jill swallowed hard, gripping the stick like a lifeline. "Except on you. And that's the one thing I regret most." The words hung in the cold air, raw and unvarnished. Bruce didn't speak right away, and Jill's heart pounded like a drumline. Then he stepped closer, his boots crunching on snow, his eyes steady on hers. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. "I wanted to," Jill replied, "because I need you to know. I'm not that girl anymore. I don't care about attention or ego. I care about this, about you." Bruce's breath fogged between them, his expression unreadable. "And if I'm not ready to jump back in?" Jill nodded, throat tight. "Then I'll take whatever you're willing to give, even if it's just a few minutes on the ice." For a long moment, Bruce just looked at her, and Jill felt the weight of every choice, every mistake, every hope pressing against her ribs. Then, slowly, he reached for the stick in her hand, his fingers brushing hers. "Let's see if you remember how to skate," he said, a smile tugging at his lips. Jill laughed, relief flooding her like warm cocoa. "Spoiler alert, I don't." Bruce chuckled, offering his hand. "Good thing I'm still steady." She took his hand, and as they stepped onto the ice, Jill felt something shift, something fragile and bright, like the first crack of dawn after a long night. Maybe this wasn't a grand gesture. Maybe it was something better. A beginning. Chapter 12. Second Chances. The ice glowed under strings of lights, casting a soft shimmer across the frozen pond. Jill clung to Bruce's hand like it was the only thing keeping her upright, which, to be fair, it was. Her boots slid, her balance wobbled, and Bruce chuckled every time she let out a startled squeak. "You're worse than I remember," he teased, steadying her with an easy grip. "Excuse me," Jill said, laughing breathlessly. "I'm a highly competent businesswoman. Ice just isn't in my job description." Bruce grinned, his eyes crinkling in that way that used to make her heart flip. "Good thing I'm still good at catching you." Jill's pulse stuttered. The words were casual, but they landed deep, stirring memories of all the times he'd been her anchor. When life was messy, when she was lost, when she didn't know who she was. He'd caught her then. And now, here he was, steady as ever. They skated, or rather, Bruce skated and Jill clung, until her legs ached and her cheeks burned from laughter. Finally, they drifted to the edge of the pond, breath puffing in the cold. The world hushed under a blanket of snow. Jill sank onto the bench, tugging off her gloves to wrap her hands around the thermos she'd brought. "Cocoa," she announced, unscrewing the lid. "Because I'm a giver." Bruce chuckled, taking the cup she offered. Their fingers brushed, and Jill felt that jolt again, the one that had haunted her since the grocery store. She swallowed hard, her heart thudding like sleigh bells. "Bruce," she said softly, staring at the steam curling between them. "I meant what I said earlier, about regretting what I did, about wanting to be better." Bruce was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the snow-dusted trees. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were steady, clear. "You've changed," he said simply. Jill's throat tightened. "I've had to." Bruce nodded slowly, then set the cup aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You hurt me, Jill, more than I ever thought you could. But I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about you. Wondered what it would be like if things were different." Jill's breath caught. "And now?" Bruce's lips curved, small, cautious, but real. "Now I'm wondering if we can find out." The world seemed to tilt, the lights blurring into stars, the cold forgotten. Jill's heart raced, hope blooming so bright it almost hurt. "I'd like that," she whispered. Bruce reached for her hand, his fingers warm against hers, and Jill felt something inside her settle, like a puzzle piece clicking into place after years of searching. He stood, tugging her gently to her feet, and before she could think, before fear could creep in, he bent his head and kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't tentative. It was steady, sure, and everything Jill had been aching for since the day she let him go. The world fell away. The snow, the lights, the years, and it was just them, standing on the edge of a frozen pond, rewriting the ending they never got. When they finally broke apart, Jill laughed softly, breathless. "About time." Bruce grinned, his forehead resting against hers. "Timing's everything, right?" Jill smiled, her heart full to bursting. "Right?" And for the first time in years, Christmas didn't feel like a reminder of what she'd lost. It felt like a promise of everything she'd found. Chapter 13. New Year, New Beginning. The town square was alive with anticipation. A sea of bundled-up neighbors gathered under strings of lights that shimmered like stars. Jill stood near the fountain, her breath curling in the frosty air, the countdown clock glowing against the snow. 10 minutes to midnight. 10 minutes to a new year and maybe a new life. Bruce was beside her, his gloved hand brushing hers every so often, sending sparks up her arm like tiny fireworks. They hadn't talked about labels, hadn't rushed into declarations. But since that kiss on the ice, everything had felt different, lighter, steadier, like the ground beneath her feet had finally stopped shifting. "You're quiet," Bruce said, his voice warm against the cold. Jill smiled, turning to him. "Just thinking." "Dangerous," he teased, and she laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of carols and chatter around them. "I was thinking," Jill said softly, "that 6 years ago, I thought I knew what mattered. Turns out I didn't." Bruce's gaze held hers, steady and sure. "And now," Jill said, her heart thudding, "I know it's this. You, us." Bruce's lips curved into that smile, the one that had undone her from the start. "Good answer." The crowd began to chant. 10, 8. Jill's pulse synced with the rhythm, her breath catching as Bruce reached for her hand, fingers lacing through hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. 3 to 1. The square erupted in cheers, fireworks bursting overhead in cascades of gold and crimson. Jill turned, and Bruce was already leaning in, his eyes bright in the glow of the lights. Their lips met as the sky bloomed with color, and Jill felt the world tilt, not in chaos, but in perfect, breathtaking alignment. When they broke apart, laughter bubbled in Jill's chest, pure and unguarded. "Happy New Year," she whispered. Bruce grinned, his forehead resting against hers. "Happy New Beginning." And just like that, Jill knew. This wasn't a second chance. It was a first because they weren't the same people they'd been. They were stronger, wiser, and ready to build something real, something that could last. As the fireworks painted the night sky, Jill squeezed Bruce's hand, her heart full to bursting. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a question mark. It felt like a promise.